we, our wonderful circle of friends from the 60s, did not know that Robert Johnson had living relatives. We knew that he had died as a young man. There were lots of stories that kept changing, and now they know more about the reality of it. But what we understood in the 60s is that he died as a young man, whether he was poisoned, we weren't sure. There were some shifting stories about the end of his life. He had recorded one record, Robert Johnson, King of the Delta Blues Singer. We didn't even know about all the outtakes then. We just knew about that one record. That's all we had in hand. We had this LP with a painting on it. We didn't even have a photo. No other music. The man is gone. Nobody is claiming to be his relatives. So we're like, this is really lonely. Look at this genius and his one record, who's really changed the music business, because if you were listening to early rock and roll, you were still hearing like Elmore James and what Muddy Waters started to do with rock and roll when he went electric. You were hearing, you know, all this roots music being contemporized, which is fantastic. That's the way it works. So imagine my amazement and really overwhelming joy when, in the middle of recording this latest Robert Johnson record, someone called me up and said, "Are you sitting down? I just got off the phone with Robert Johnson's grandson, and he wants to talk to you." Now, they knew that I didn't know that there were any living relatives, or they wouldn't have said, "Are you sitting down?" You know. So I was like, "What grandson? What relatives?" I'm like, this is too good to be true. And so now I felt like a very personal part of myself was found. Okay, this is just the way I felt about it. I dialed the phone. I was totally shaking with anticipation and anxiety and joy and all these feelings. And this beautiful voice answered, and I said, and I had nothing planned. I didn't have this scripted. I didn't write anything down. What will you say when Robert Johnson's family answers the phone? You know, I didn't even think about it. I just dialed the phone, and I said these words that later they have never left my mind because they just came out. And I said, "You don't know me, but to me, your family, I feel like I'm meeting long lost kin." And the person on the other end was not put out by what I said, because they could have said, "Excuse me, you know, hello, I don't know you," you know. They could have had that response. There was pure warmth on the other end of the phone, and I was like, "You have to talk to me." I said, I was like at this person's mercy because I cared so much. It was really like, well, this is part of my family somehow. And so he was kind and generous and called me back. He was into something and had to call me back and gave me lots and lots of time. We had this amazing conversation. We had a series of conversations. And he said, you know, maybe you know more about my grandfather than I do at this point. He said, you know, now that's changed because now he runs the Robert Johnson Blues Foundation, and he's like, they're totally up on all this new information about Robert Johnson. But that changed my life again, and I went to Mississippi knowing that meeting his family would be this incredibly emotional experience for me, which it was. And it was documented by the photographer for that record who came with me and took pictures. So Stephen Johnson told me that he is a minister. He's an elder at the Straightway Ministries Church. And I said, you know, that's interesting. I said, you probably were raised with a stigma about music, blues being the music of the devil. We would go to Reverend Gary Davis's house, and his wife would come in and stop him from playing blues. You know, it was like the devil's music. If you're a reverend, you play God's music. If you're a blues singer, you know, you have no part of that other music. Those are two very separate things. So he said, yeah, you're right. I said, I don't believe blues is music of the devil. Not for a moment. I said, I believe it's anointed, spirit-filled music. And he agreed with that. And so it was like everything that we talked about, we understood what the other one was talking about. And then he said, well, we have this great choir down here. And I'm like, whoa. He said, believe me, it's great. I said, I believe you. I said, you're Robert Johnson's grandson. If you say that you've got a great choir, you've got a great choir. So he came up with the idea that we would do a concert where Johnson's family would introduce me, and I would do the music of Robert Johnson. I mean, that was beyond an honor. I couldn't believe that. So then I called him back and I said, you know, what if we tried this really interesting thing where we said, the Johnsons introduce, I do a set of Robert Johnson, then you bring up your choir, and we call it Down at the Crossroads Blues Meets Gospel, because I always wanted to show the connection between blues and gospel. I mean, Charlie Patton, you name just about any early blues person, and they also recorded gospel. There is just a total marriage, it's seamless marriage between blues and gospel. Okay, so we went on tour with this beautiful concept, Down at the Crossroads Blues Meets Gospel, last summer, and now this summer, summer of 07, in just a week or so, we'll be on another tour. The first night was Wheeling, West Virginia, and we just did the show as we had planned. The second night, I said to Stephen, Stephen, why don't you preach before the songs? You know, that's what you do. And so he rolled this podium out on the stage, and he started having a scriptural introduction to Robert Johnson songs. And he was like testifying. I mean, it got hair-raising. The second night, from that point on, we were on this incredible roll, and Stephen was preaching, and he was like testifying. It was like awesome what happened. And the whole music, everything ramped up as a result. So he said, my grandfather couldn't have sold his soul to the devil. He said, you can't sell something you don't own. You know, he started with that, and everybody would like. He said, yeah, I know that everybody likes a good story. They like to sink their teeth into Robert Johnson went down to the crossroads and sold his soul to the devil. He goes, but my grandfather was a man of God. He said, listen to the words he sings. Went down to the crossroad, fell down on my knees, asked the Lord above for mercy. And he said, poor Bob, if you please, if I had possession over Judgment Day, I wouldn't have no right to pray. So I thought, okay, well, how would he introduce me and the devil if he's going to be so able to introduce Robert Johnson's music in a scriptural way? So he had a way, he had this awesome way. He said, when you're anointed, when you're gifted, when you're talented, when you're on a mission, he said, the devil wants to take that away from you. He said, of course you're going to have a hellhound on your trail. I just thought that was the most beautiful perspective. Early this morning, when you knocked upon my door, early this morning, ooh, when you knocked upon my door, I sang, hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go. Me and the devil say we walking side by side. Me and the devil say we walking side by side. Said I got to love my baby till I get satisfied. Said I don't see why he would dog me round. Now, baby, no, you ain't doing me right. I said I don't see why he would dog me round. Must be that old evil spirit so deep down in the ground. You may bury my body down by the highway side. Now, babe, I don't care where you bury my body when I'm dead and gone. You may bury my body down by the highway side. So my old evil spirit can't catch the ground,